Hey, everybody, welcome back to your Full Crew podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldi, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. This month, we've dedicated to the theme of military technology, and man, what a rock star panel we have for you today. So, we're going to introduce them in just one second, but before we do, I do want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors that make this show possible. The sponsors for this show are Valmont, Aiken, True Weather Solutions, and Mark 43. We're going to talk about our topics as well, but before I do that and before these folks introduce themselves, some of them are actually government employees or government affiliated. And just up front, being a lawyer myself, I want to make sure that it is clear that they're speaking from their own personal point of views. They're not representing the agencies who actually employ them or that they're affiliated with. So just to be clear on that up front. Disclaimer aside, let's just go ahead and move on. I want to go ahead and get this panel introduced. And let's start with the illustrious Major General James Poss, United States Air Force retired.
Wasn't sure if that was luminous, and that was a discussion about my relative lack of hair, or illustrious. There's a big difference here. So, yeah, hey, Don, good to be back on the Full Crew. God, I think it's my third time, maybe several times here. But if you didn't read my bio, I retired from the Air Force in 2013 as a Major General. I was the Deputy Chief of Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance for the U.S. Air Force, and the Senior Career Intelligence Officer in the U.S. Air Force. Fought in 4 wars. And got to be known as the drone guy towards the end of my career, because the only folks back then in the Air Force that liked drones were the intel guys. When I got out of the Air Force in 2013, I was hired by Mississippi State to win them the FAA's Drone Research Center of Excellence, which I did. And I was the proud founder of ASSURE, the Alliance for System Safety of UAS Research Excellence, which is still the FAA's Drone Research Center of Excellence. So thanks for the invite.
Oh, thanks so much for coming. And wow, again, where do you hear the rest of them? So let's go with Trent Emeneker next from the Defense Innovation Unit.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for the intro, Dawn. My background, I was active duty in the Marine Corps for 11 years. I flew in the backseat of the F-18 as a navigator. While on active duty, I also deployed as a forward air controller at JTAC with an infantry unit. Joined the reserves back in 2013 and have served as a battalion air officer, a regimental air officer. I'm on staff now at TTECG, which is the Marine Corps' premier large force training center in 29 Palms, California. Leaving active duty, I went to grad school, got an MBA from Columbia Business School, went to work for GE Aerospace, did a variety of roles there, and then 4 years ago, I came to DIU. Been in my current role now as the Blue UAS project lead for just a little over a year.
Very cool. Continuing that military theme, let's go with Commander Tracy Reynolds.
Hello, everyone, and thanks to Dawn for inviting me to be here today. This is my first time, and I am thrilled to be part of, such a fascinating and intelligent group of people. I look forward to hearing about everybody's article. I have 17 and a half years of active duty Navy service. I am a Navy judge advocate, which means that I advise decision makers ashore and afloat on operational planning, exercise readiness, as well as decisions in C2 whenever we are going through strict transits or having troops in contact, things of that nature. It's been exciting in ways that I never could have imagined, and I have been lucky enough to get my LLM in international law as part of the Navy, as well as a master's in national security studies from the Naval War College, and I'm currently a remote PhD student to the University of Adelaide, and my PhD thesis is specific to outer space law. And so for me, being here is exciting because we didn't plan it, but all of our articles kind of have a bit of a theme. So thank you for the opportunity to talk a bit about myself, but let's move on.
Yes, and last but certainly not least, an alum of my fine college, institution there that we both attended, the University of Scranton, John McHale from Military Embedded Systems Magazine.
Thanks, Dawn, and it's good to be back on stage, as it were, with you again, and also with General Poss, and also with Tracy, as I've hosted and moderated in-person and virtual events with both of them, and with one of Trent's predecessors at the DIU. So it's good to be back, and as Dawn said, I'm the editorial director of Military Embedded Systems magazine. I've been covering the defense and aerospace industry for nearly 30 years. And yes, prior to that, Dawn and I walked the same streets at the same college at the same time. So small world.
It is. We call it fondly the you. And, you know, I usually don't talk about myself, but super quick. For those that don't know, and I think most of you do, I'm also a retired United States Air Force colonel. Was a JAG like Tracy, but for the Air Force. And I did that for almost 25 years. So, you know, these topics and this crowd is very near and dear to my heart. And by the way, speaking of near and dear to my heart, Fire Mech Tech Rob is out there giving us the thumbs up. We love that guy. He's a super fan. So thanks for joining us, Rob. Always awesome to have you. And by the way, we are live. So drop your questions, make your comments, tell us where you're from. We love all that. So 4 articles today. We're going to round robin these. We're going to be talking about Ukraine's naval drone success and key lessons for the U.S. Navy. We're going to be talking about U.S. military lags in adopting new drone machine guns, essentially, AI technology and what's happening at SOCOM. And we're going to end it on Anduril and how they're building out the Pentagon's dream of deadly drone swarms. So let's go ahead and kick it off with our very first article. This is one that General Paz submitted for us. And it is all about Ukraine's naval drone success and how it holds a huge lesson for the U.S. Navy. So, Gerald Paz, tell us a little bit about this article, why you selected it, and what you think is important about it.
Yeah, well, I selected it because it allows me to do 2 things. Number 1, say good things about drones, and number 2, pick on the U.S. Navy a little bit. Who doesn't want to do that? So. And it's the Navy, not the Marines I'm going to be picking on. So I only got one I got to deal with there, Tracy.
Oh, they're the same.
Okay, well, that's a whole different full crew discussion. So let's not go there. Yeah, no, I mean, the real reason I picked this is because there's been a lot of talk about what drones are doing and not doing, about the offensive use of drones, counter drones and all that. But it's generally spoken of in either a ground aspect is what's going on in Gaza and what's going on in Ukraine, or essentially an Air Force aspect, which you see the Russians firing waves after waves of drones at deep targets in Ukraine. Ukraine is doing the same thing. No one ever talks very much about the massive impact this is having on naval warfare. And if they do talk about it, they tend to talk about what the Houthis are doing against the combined might of the U.S. Navy, Royal Navy, Dutch Navy, German Navy, and the Canadians are in there. A whole bunch of very sophisticated stuff. What they don't talk about is how well the Ukrainians have done against one of the world's largest navies, essentially without their own navy of their own. And this article makes a big point of the fact that the Ukrainians have taken out about 1/3 of the Russians' Black Sea fleet so far, largely using drones and the occasional cruise missile. But more importantly for this discussion, and I think more importantly for the U.S. Navy, they've also managed to break a blockade that the Russians have had on Ukrainian grain. Ukrainian grain is now flowing freely through the Black Sea. There's not much the Russians can do about it. And indeed, I think this month, Ukrainians are going to be near pre-war levels as far as their grain exports out there. All done without everything that I was trained to believe that you had to have in order to break an effective blockade when I went to the Naval War College at Newport. But basically, Tracy, jump in here if I get this wrong. But basically, to break a blockade, you either got to do it with surface vessels or subsurface vessels, and the Russians had plenty of surface vessels that they were using to enforce the blockade. They've only got 4 submarines. The Black Sea is a little different than any other body of water in the world because it's controlled by the Montrose Convention, which Tracy, you definitely will have to jump in here if I get this wrong. But basically, it doesn't allow aircraft carriers into the Black Sea, and it sort of gives Turkey a veto over what can and can't go in there. So they haven't been allowing submarines or replacement combatants to come in. But if you look at what Ukraine has been doing, you fast forward that to lessons for the U.S. Navy, and you see that we're not really picking up on that. And I think that's going to be a common theme throughout the articles that we've seen here, is that the U.S. military is way behind in drone warfare and is not catching up particularly fast. The Navy is a fascinating study in culture. If you look at the portion of the Navy that is mission specific, not platform specific, and I'm going to put the oceanography and the intel guys in there. And then you look at the other side of the Navy, which is focused on platforms and not necessarily missions. I'm definitely put naval aviation and to a lesser extent surface warfare. You'll find that the greatest adopters of unmanned vehicles has been the oceanographers because they don't care. They got to beg and plead to where they get their assets from. And if you look at where they're getting their data from, you'll find most of them are from unmanned sources. Same with the intel guys. Navy intel isn't as well funded as Army or Air Force, but they're big supporters of drones. Who hates drones the most and who have been the most adamant opponents of it is carrier-based naval aviation. We should have had a carrier-based drone 20 years ago, but we still don't have, well, we sort of have one. It's the MQ-25. And believe it or not, naval aviation has turned that into a air refueling aircraft and not a strike ISR. Hey, Trent, I can hear you typing and moving stuff around. You may
Yeah. He's taking notes, I think, ready to make his comment.
Sorry.
You know, General Passes, I'm
Well, he's a
listening to
Marine.
you.
He's not going to attack me. I'm looking at the
You have to,
sailor. I'm seeing what's
you
going
have to
on
excuse
up
the
there.
good general. He's very easily distracted, clearly. But
Yeah.
but General, I want to jump on that real quick and pass it over to Trent because you know, oftentimes real life mimics Hollywood, and what you just said about culture. You know, I mean, we saw that in Top Gun Maverick. You know, right, where you had the and I think, you know, the drone guys, or was it? Yeah, the drone guys wanted to do drones, and it's like, you know, you got the pilots like, no, we need guys.
Yeah, the one where the carrier-based naval aviation guy lost half of his package in a mission that could have easily done by drones. Yes, I've seen that movie.
That one, yes, and you wrote a really cool article about it. But let's go over to you, Trent, because you know, your article, we're going to talk about it here shortly, tracks this theme that we're seeing of, you know, just the failure to adopt and really learn from the lessons we're seeing overseas. You read General Paul's article. You've got the Marine background. What are your thoughts on this?
So one, I want to say thanks to the authors of the article, Walker Mills and Commander Trevor Phillips Levine. They put in words, kind of a discussion that we've been having at DIU repeatedly with a lot of folks for a while now, which echoes Jim's comments. The way that we fight wars has changed, not is changing, but it has changed at the tactical level, regardless of whether we are talking about ground combat, naval combat, and we also see it now flowing rapidly into logistics. The U.S. Department of Defense is not keeping up. And I think the article gives a great example of why, using the analogy of machine guns going into World War I. If you look at the history of machine guns in the late 1800s, they were present. They worked, you know, they weren't super efficient, but it was very clear the tactical way that could impact a traditional infantry fight. How many people in major militaries really grasped that and took advantage of it? The answer is none. The Germans didn't, the French didn't, the Brits didn't, the US didn't. And that led to eventually a stalemate in World War I for years, where massive amounts of people died because we did not understand how to deal with the changing way that tactical battles were being fought. So you carry that through to World War II. There were actual horse-mounted cavalry charges in World War II by militaries because the conception then was still cavalry is the solution, and people were very slow to come to grips with that. So the answer, you know, that I want to point out is why. Culture is really hard to change. We can have black and white evidence, but when you think of the impact on a bureaucracy or on a program office or on a service, echoing Jim's comments about how hard it is for the traditional organizations to give up or change, he pointed to success from oceanographers. I would point to success we've seen at DIU from folks like EOD or NSW or SOCOM. People accustomed to thinking outside of the box, who run flat, lean structures and know that to survive, they have to live on the edge and adapt very, very quickly to what risk is. And that's a theme that I think you see echoed throughout this article. Also, we can look to history. To quote Jim Mattis, like he talks many times about reading history books and understanding the conceptual framework that battles and evolution of military tactics comes through. You look to the past to inform the present. That doesn't mean that the past dictates the present, but it gives you a conceptual framework. And here we see machine guns change the face of warfare. If you look at World War II, armor and the close coordination between ground and aviation changed the face of battle. You can also talk about it in a naval concept and logistics, but different iterations of battle over the past 150 years have been very clear that things change. If you don't adapt, you're going to lose. We can look at the Gulf War. Precision warfare was new. The Iraqis lost. But then the answer is you have to continually change and evolve. One last comment before we go on is, a thing that I think underlies this is we're talking about hardware, but software is what's going to enable success with all these physical platforms that we're talking about. We need baseline hardware capabilities, absolutely. But we also have a culture and a process that's going to allow software to iterate at the speed and with the effectiveness that Ukraine and other battlefields around the world show us we have to do. That's on a scale of days and weeks, not months and years as DoD currently operates. And so with that, I'll pause and let you move on, Don.
No, that's great, Steph. Because this is live and as tends to happen, things go out of order, and that's okay. Because there was definitely a thread between General Paz's article about the Navy's lessons learned from what's happening in Ukraine and Trent's article, which outlines basically how the U.S. is failing to adapt and using this whole idea of the machine gun back in World War I as kind of a historical example of the failure to adapt to that change. And so taking both of those articles then, I'm going to turn to Tracy next to give your thoughts on either one or both, because clearly there's a thread and there's even more threads to the next two articles as well, once we get into software, AI, and swarms and things of this nature. But just kind of looking, Tracy, maybe from the perch that you normally sit in, of course, not speaking for the U.S. Navy, and also, seeing these lessons being learned as we speak, and also historically, what are your thoughts on these things?
I appreciate the comments raised about the lack of flexibility within the DoD and the lack of adaptability as well. But I think I might see this just a little differently, because it's not because of lack of innovative thinkers within our armed services. I think we have some of the smartest, most driven, just absolutely innovative thinkers, but they're not empowered to do the things that they should do. Like, I was really excited to join Naval Special Warfare for a tour, and it was shocking to me how fast some things could happen. But then there are other things that are just as slow as everything else. I mean, it took 18 years to take from design on a board to a new combat craft, to go through all of the appropriate bureaucratic hoops and contractor requirements. And we can't make Congress go any faster. We can't make a budget appear. I mean, if we had that capability and power, I don't think we would be in some of these NDAA and continuing budget resolutions that we're in. And so from my perspective, it's not really a question of the Navy failing to adapt. It's more that our hands are tied almost in the same way that our platforms are bound by the laws of physics. You can't turn an aircraft carrier in 30 seconds. It's going to take 3 to 5 minutes with 1 degree of steerage change over the course of time, influenced by geography, in order to make changes. And just the way our major platforms are impacted by bathymetry and topography and water states, so are the Navy's planning, execution, training, contracts are all bound by these exterior forces over which we have no control. Specifically being able to actually get money, empowerment, trust, and a place to execute these wonderful ideas that folks in the field already have.
No, great points across the board. I think it was Trent's article, and I don't have it in my little notes here, but kind of talked about this almost like triangle of death. It's like Congress. It was like Congress. I remember the triangle now. It was Congress, federal bureaucrats, which honestly I place less blame on them. We could talk about that if you want. And then it was, what was the third one? It was having to do with the money. Congress, the bureaucrats, and anyway, if somebody could
Don,
remember what that was, it's great.
yeah,
So,
I'd throw service culture in there first and foremost. And I'll disagree with you,
well,
but
thank you. It was it was
professional.
almost like the defense contractors. That was like the other leg of this three-legged
Right.
stool. So,
Yeah,
the culture. Yeah, go ahead.
it all boils down to culture because, I sort of give the Air Force higher marks for realizing that they need autonomous unmanned vehicles now. And they really are moving in the right direction. But holy cow, we've had modern drones since 1995, and we're only now, coming up with ones that could do it. Naval aviation, carrier-based naval aviation, has had all the time in the world to come up with a
Carrier-based aviation, with
aircraft.
all due respect, General, is bound by Congress people who do things like promise to their, the funding is a huge piece. I mean, we have our submarines. Where does the Navy spend money? We don't spend it on our people. We don't spend it on our bases. We spend it on our platforms. And we often bound by where we can put those things.
Yeah, look at the MQ-25, which is something that the Navy has been developing for 15 years, 10 years. That was the United States Navy Naval Aviation that decided to take what is a wonderful carrier-borne platform. And by the way, they've had one since Northrop Grumman came up with the U-class 15 years ago, and turn it into a tanker instead of an ISR strike aircraft.
Well, I would love to talk about the technical details of all of those things, because, when the Ford was going underway on her maiden voyage, we had all these conversations about necessary wind envelopes and who's going to fly the F-22 in these circumstances, and what can this ship do and what can that ship do. But, there's people who've been in the Navy longer than me, but there's people who haven't. And what I see when I'm in the Navy are decision makers, admirals, and innovative thinkers who are bound by exterior bureaucracies over which they have no control. The reason why we have Navy Personnel Command in Millington, Tennessee is because of Al Gore, not because some admiral thought that was a great idea. And that might sound like a silly example, but all of those influences upon us matter.
Hey, first of all, rookie mistake, my apologies. I did not put my do not disturb on the phone. So you heard that nice little jingle in the background. But really, perfect way to break up the fist fight going on in the panel. I want to give John an opportunity to talk because he's been chomping at the bit here. I've been watching his face. He's been smiling, not smiling, smiling again. So, John, let's bring it over to you.
So I'll you turn over to the journalist to break the tie. But what I will say, after covering this industry for 30 years, I do think it is cultural, as the general says, in a lot of respects, and reading history as well. You talked about machine guns, but you also, Trent referenced, and in the article it references, I think in the article, but the tanks, right? You're looking from cavalry to tanks. It took a long time because the culture of the leadership, they grew up on cavalry. So to convince them that the way they were taught and won battles is not the way to do it anymore is very difficult and challenging and difficult to overcome. But what I think Ukraine has shown us is, hey, you can acquire technology pretty fast and put it to use on the battlefield. So the defense acquisition process does not have to be slow. Now, changing it, that's cultural. I've written about this, and we are heavily involved in our coverage on MOSA, which is Modular Open Systems Approach, or open architecture designs, to basically get more commercial technology in more quickly and more deployed more quickly to the warfighter to give them that capability. But what I've also known is I don't know that it's possible to change the defense acquisition process. You have to come up with new ways of doing it, like the Defense Innovation Unit, where Trent comes from, other transaction authorities. And, Tracy, you mentioned Naval Special Forces. Well, look at what Special Ops does with SoftWorks, right? It's a great way to get companies or technology in that would never do business or think they would do business with Special Forces, and to get that technology demonstrated and get it out to the field more quickly. I think that's what that's what Ukraine has taught us, as anything, is you can get that tech into the hands of warfighters quickly if you want to. And I think that's where Trent's, to break the tie, I don't know if I really did, but that's kind of where we go. And that's kind of what my interview with Brandon Singh, which we talk about next, comes up.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different stakeholders at play that contribute to where we are today, and clearly culture plays a big role in that. But it's not just one culture. There's so many subcultures. General Poss was talking about the kind of the naval surface, aviation community. But and Tracy, I don't know if you'll agree with me. I can say this now because I'm no longer a JAG. It wasn't even so much the JAG Corps, it was more the General Counsel's office that I also worked for. There's a lot of folks that like to say no. And, who are those advisors? Who are the people that are supposed to be helping that mission along, to get it done and finding ways? Again, as long as it's not illegal, immoral, unethical, like make it happen. That was always my mantra. And frankly, it wasn't always popular. It was popular with my commanders because I got things done for them. But oftentimes amongst I found myself in fistfights with my colleagues, to get legislation passed or a policy changed. And so again, there's a lot of cultures, a lot of stakeholders that we're dealing with here. Absolutely. By the way, Mark Ganung from the Nevada test site is out there. He says hello. Mark is also a super fan. His comment is this: acquisition reform is required. Culture at senior level attempted new with the LCS and DD-21 class ships with poor results. My concern is the Navy will retreat to evolutionary vice revolutionary APP.
Bless you, Mark, for making that comment, because I've had the littoral combat ships in the back of my mind throughout all of this conversation. Because I know the admiral that ran that plan through the N7 at the Chief Naval Office. And, the plan that went in didn't look a whole lot like what came out. And then the manner in which it was implemented on the surface was not an accurate reflection in the view of the folks who originally came up with that idea. And that was because it got picked apart throughout the process. And, I definitely see the points about culture, but I don't know if that's specifically unique to the Navy. I haven't had a whole lot of joint experience.
Yeah, no.
It is not
unique to the Navy. I'm not saying
no,
that
clearly, because Trent's article was about the Army and
sure.
Going to adopt.
And the Air Force still calls them remotely piloted aircraft, right? They don't want to dismiss the fact that there are fighters out there.
I only give the Air Force incremental marks for finally, after 20 years, recognizing they need more autonomous stuff. But on the other side, we're all talking about acquisition, and acquisition needs to reform. But when you have a service that is bound and determined to do something that is center of mass culture stuff, and I'll pick on the Air Force again with the B-21 Raider, they will move heaven and earth to do that. And there's a program that culturally everybody in the Air Force wants yet another manned stealth bomber. And they've put this in their rapid capabilities office. They've got these special acquisition stuff. They've kind of classified most of it so Congress doesn't get a tremendous vote in what's going. And that thing is moving gangbusters. But you compare and contrast that with the long-suffering tale of the Air Force's to date most effective combat platform, the MQ-9. And everything that was done with the MQ-9 was done against the will of the Air Force and at the behest of either the Special Operations or other government agency, or the Army and Marine Corps out there. So this is not a Navy problem. It's all of them. But I'll make the argument that the biggest impetus to being more effective with autonomous vehicles is in fact cultural, because it threatens platform-specific subcultures in all of our services.
And Trent, what do you think?
Yeah, so I agree with Jim. Coming down, when you tell someone who's done something for 25 years that what they have done for that time is no longer valid, doesn't matter anymore, is outdated and irrelevant, human nature says, I'm going to dig my heels in because I don't want to admit that. Now, every now and then we'll find a maverick who's going to understand that the world has changed. But our program offices, our services, our senior leadership, again, all people doing what they believe is the right thing. And I don't ever, I'm never going to cast aspersions on that. People think they're doing what's right. But in fact, by holding on to the past and not moving forward in the future, the unfortunate truth is, from where I sit, I care very much about the 19-year-old kid carrying a rifle if he goes to combat or she goes to combat, because they're going to die because we're not giving them what they need, because people don't want to let go of the past. I flew as a navigator in the F-18. My personal opinion, like in 10 years, manned aviation is dead. The going near the forward line of troops against a near peer, I just think that surface to air missiles and the systems that are out there now are going to be very prohibitive. Maybe I'm wrong, but like that's the kind of mindset we have to be willing to let go.
Trent, I would agree, and I would say, well, we already have had people die. I mean, the attack on Jordan, the Tower 22 is the first time in 70 years, 70, since the Korean War, that we've had ground troops killed from the air. And, if that wasn't a wake-up call for people, I don't know what is, because we're seeing this play out on a daily basis, not just in Ukraine with Russia, Israel, Hamas, Syria, in the Red Sea, it's everywhere. Now turn to the South China Sea. We already know there's exercises going on there. So it's just like, wow, what are we waiting for? But we are at our halfway point. I hear from my producer that we've got a ton of people out there. Just a reminder, we are live. Please jump in the chat, say hello, like Mark did, and our other buddy Fire Mech Tech Rob, because we know there's more of you out there. Also wanted to once again thank our sponsors for making this all possible: Valmont, Aiken, True Weather Solutions, and Mark 43. So let's go ahead and since we went a little bit out of order, we're going to go with Article 2 now. Mike, in the background there, my Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. This is John's article. Okay, nope, this is all right.
That's mine.
We'll go.
It's mine. Yeah.
That is your article?
It is, yeah.
Okay,
AI
perfect. I'm sorry. It's like,
okay.
For me to see it is super tiny, but this is AI technology and SOCOM. So you were at the Special Ops
SOF Week.
Week.
It's called Special Operations Forces Week. Yeah, we were the official media sponsor. We produced the show daily. The show was run by the Global SOF Foundation. That would be Stu Braden and his crew. They did a great job. It was a fabulous event. I encourage anyone who hasn't been to the show to check it out. And I picked this article after reading the articles that General Poss and Trent picked, because I thought it fit, kind of takes to whatever level what they were saying. And also just to note that throughout the show there was tons of autonomous systems being demonstrated for use and by special forces. But this was for a pre-interview I did with Brandon Seng, who's the co-founder and president of Shield AI. And two things struck me on this one. So the fourth question down, the fifth question. Fourth question down, I asked him about operators tell me over the years that they don't often see cutting edge technology at the shows like SOF Week, but as the military adopts commercial technologies, that change. And he talked about his experience when people wanted him to try out an app called the Android Team Awareness Kit, or ATAK, which is now common among all. And he was like, it's turning me out of my training. It's going to slow me down. But now they look back, it's just everyone has one. And then the next question I ask him is, how do you see AI impacting special operations forces in the military 5 or 10 years from now? Now, Shield AI produces drones and produces AI technology to kind of help communicate them. And this quote really struck me. He said, AI pilots, self-driving technology is applied to drones. These can be UAVs, UGVs, ground vehicles, you name it. It doesn't matter what domain they're operating in. This is something I speak a lot with international customers about. There's no reason why a SEAL platoon or a Ranger troop can't wield the same combat power as a carrier strike group. No reason why, with AI, those 16 people can't have the same combat power as a 5,000 person carrier strike group consisting of 200 aircraft, short and long range missiles, destroyers, etc. This is so important for people to wrap their head around in terms of the impacts of AI pilots. It's coming, and it's coming quickly, where you will have a single person capable of commanding 300,000 aircraft loitering munitions effectively with the optimal effectiveness on the battlefield because of the AI is piloting, commanding, and maneuvering these assets. And he said, SOCOM has the smallest budget of the services, but there's no reason why they can't have the biggest impact if they employ these resources in a sophisticated way. So that really struck me as kind of where we can take this technology, kind of what both articles are talking about. If we can get our head around the acquisition process, get out of our own way on culture. I mean, it sounds like science fiction that one guy can control all these things, but the technology is being developed. And I just thought it would be a worthy companion to the other two pieces. And also takes it to Tracy's, Drone Swarms article. Sorry, Paul,
Yeah,
for that.
I
You
will.
don't.
We'll get to that drone swarm article in a second, but or maybe like in maybe 10 minutes after we discuss this one. But yeah, let's go to Tracy next. Man, as a JAG that advises on the law of war, I think there's been some criticism about this idea of AI. What does it mean? How's that going to be driven by policy or the rules of war, law of war, rules of engagement? You got one pilot, let's just say, commanding 50,000 things, which one thing could have a 50,000 times impact, good or bad. As you read this article and you consider it about AI and its role in these future vehicles, what were your thoughts?
Well, as I was going through that article, I kept thinking about the down delegation of authority to the lowest rank on the scene military member who would then be able to bring to bear the necessary solution to fit whatever that problem would be. And I thought it was really exciting. And this may get to kind of my Pollyanna approach to all of this. But I definitely agree that culture is going to beat strategy all the time. But one thing that I've always appreciated about Navy culture is that over the horizon mentality, where the person that's there uses the things that they have to solve the problem that they see. And when I was reading through that article, it struck me that properly harnessing AI to take advantage of that down delegation mindset, I think could really shorten that decision making cycle. It's whether our culture, as we've been talking about all along, will allow us to do it. One thing I like about the way we do law of armed conflict in the United States and along with some partner nations is that these rules are baked in from the very beginning, because we have an obligation by both statute and policy to ensure that we respect the law of armed conflict no matter what type of engagement we're involved in or what the person against whom we're fighting thinks about it. And so it's kind of the thought of getting to the left of the fact scenario far enough that you can bake in those solutions from the beginning, which is what DoD policy and from my perspective does right now, is putting humans in the loop, so to speak, in these different scenarios in order to ensure that there is that human oversight. But as we've seen in our laboratory of Ukraine, how this actually works on the ground might be outside what we've thought of from a policy perspective.
Yeah, I would love to hear Trent's thoughts on that.
So, I think it's interesting when we talk about keeping humans in the loop. If we think of an artillery piece, 155 launches a projectile between 17 and 28 kilometers downrange, depending on the propellant that it has. Once you pull the lanyard, it's gone. We don't have any control over it. It's going somewhere, hopefully close to where you want to, but no human can control that. I think where we are today is in a similar situation, only we're trying to control something now further down range just because we think we can. The concept of how you properly delegate authority or responsibility down to the lowest level, I think is key. But we're not talking about unleashing massive swarms of killer drones. But that's what we often bog down the discussion in. And I don't think that's what you were saying, Tracy, but I think that's a key point to bring up.
No, I think you're totally right. And using our precise language precisely to ensure that we're clearly communicating what we mean is key. Because I liked your machine gun article because it highlighted the problem of delaying implementation of new technologies. And I think it dovetails really well into John's article, because when I was reading John's article, it showed how powerful, like how much force or problem solving can be brought to bear at the lowest level if we'll only let it happen. But in order to do that, because I'm the lawyer, we want to make sure that we're acting in accordance with law and policy unless we've asked for a waiver from the appropriate authority. Because every rule, as I'm sure everybody knows from their time, can have an exception. It's just thinking about it before it happens, which is the hardest part.
Yeah, I'd love to hear General Passa's thoughts, because General, you were involved, in the very early days of drone warfare. And look, I was involved in some of that. We can't reveal state secrets here, but let's just put it this way: that idea of delegation, people talk a big game about it, but at the end of the day, there was still some pretty damn high approvals for a lot of things that had to occur. And I just can't even imagine a world where we'd have that strategic tactical troop, if you will, commanding 50,000 things at once, on his or her own, out somewhere on a remote battlefield. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's a problem we've already considered and largely solved. I mean,
Okay.
we have a JTAC on the line, or I guess it used to be a Marlow back in the old days, but we figured out how to literally allow that E6, and a lot of our JTACs are E6s, how to get the permissions, comply with all the positive ID of the target, all the collateral damage stuff, all the law warfare stuff, all the approval stuff, and we've had JTACs in Afghanistan, drop 2 or 3 B1 loads worth of JDAMs, and I'm not going to do the math in public, but that is 66 times 2,000 pounds of explosive done by a different person. Now, where drones do make a big difference is when we start talking about AI, and which is why we spend so much time talking about whether or not to keep humans in the loop, and that's a massive discussion. And granted, my experience with artificial intelligence and automatic target recognition and all that is extremely dated, but it never got to the position where I would have been comfortable in completely trusting a no human in the loop weapons engagement. But as far as humans in the loop stuff, yeah, we thought that through. That's what JTACs do. But everybody that's been talking about all of the AI, the ability to, maybe an E6 to control a carrier group worth of stuff, that all hinges very much on whether you have a human in the loop, whether you trust AI, and how that impacts the laws of armed conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna bring it back to John to close this one out, since it's your article, John. It was on our full crew. I feel like it was almost this time last year. I could be wrong, but there was an alleged exercise where some Air Force lieutenant colonel was out there yammering that the AI they had employed as part of the exercise killed the pilot. And then it was like, oh yeah, nothing to see here. That never really happened, and it was just very bizarre, the whole thing. I don't remember all the gory details of it, but John, your final thoughts on AI and uncrewed technologies, whether air, land, surface, subsurface. What are your thoughts on this article, and then kind of close us out on this one.
Well, I think it's empowering I liked how Tracy put it, by getting to the person lowest on a totem pole and giving them the power they need to do their job. Maybe it'll speed up decision making, but the technology has to work. And so I don't think what Mr. Sang is saying in his art in the interview I did with him is that it's there now, but they've developed it where it could get to that point, and there's no reason we shouldn't shoot to get there. And that kind of ties into I'm going to try to preview Tracy's article, is that you talk about drones and drone swarms. I hate to say it, but there's also a financial element to this too, right? So a government adverse to spend money, if it's just like with satellites and multi-constellations, you throw more of them up there. If 1 or 2 fail, it's okay because you got a numbers advantage. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes that might drive, if we get the technology to the point where we can do drone swarms and it's cost effective, like Anduril's doing. Anduril's also leveraging a lot of commercial technology for their other stuff, for their radar systems. They're doing a lot of innovative things. Then I think, I'm just going to end it by saying, I think money, whether we have the funding or not, and he makes a good point, special ops is the least funded of the services, or the arms of the services, but yet those are some of the most efficient frontline people. They're the ones you want to get the hands to try the technology out to, and they're already doing that through intervention, through groups like Trent and through the SoftWorks. But I think, unfortunately, as much as we want it, as much as we want to change the culture, it's on some level there's going to be a financial payment. Trent's nodding his head.
Yeah, I think John's hitting the nail on the head. So number one, I think when we talk about this industry today, as we look at the US and at the West, the price points for the platforms we have, if we think of what the Replicator Initiative talks about, creating attritable autonomous platforms, they also have to be at the right cost per use. And if we are paying the price for an MQ-9 and it goes out and it lasts for 6 days, like, we can't afford that. So we have to come up with ways where we are developing minimally adequate platforms that we can make cheaply and quickly, because in a lot of ways, this is a mass game. The US military traditionally wants that high-end boutique, one-size-fits-all solution to everything for all time, and that's expensive. What we observe in the world today is that cheap mass is effective, but you also have to man and equip your troops so they can train and develop the TTPs. They need to go out and operate successfully and understand the UAS and the counter UAS game, and how to employ the software and where it works and where it doesn't. Within DoD today, we're at less than 10% of the drone equipment rate at the tactical level that published DoD documents call for. Less than 10%, more than 2 years after Ukraine is kicked off. That is, and this is my opinion, but it's a travesty to our warfighters to say, we say you need these things to go live in combat, but we're not going to give them to you. And if we are, we're going to put a 2029, 2030, 2032. That's when your unit can expect stuff. We have to figure out a way around that. And that goes to culture. It goes to services and program offices deciding they want to do it now, not perfect 6 years in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to transition to Tracy's article here, but I want to say, like a lot of this technology, it's out there, and you're absolutely right, Trent. It's not in the hands of the warfighter. I'm going to give you one quick example. And by the way, not a true client. So, full transparency here. I'm just a super fan of Black Swift Technologies out of Boulder, Colorado. Dr. Jack Elston was just on my Dawn of Autonomy podcast. This guy's creating drones in his little place up in Boulder. That NOAA is dropping out of P3s en masse into center hurricanes to get readings that they've never had before. This is just one example of a completely innovative company that could be doing more and more with the DoD on attritable. These things look like the inside of your paper towel holders, like that's how small they are. And they're not going to survive. They know that when they drop it out of the plane, and it's okay. So this stuff is out there. You just have to look and find it, and you also have to get it into the system. And how do you do that? That is the problem. Oh, and by the way, Jack's tech also has handled Venus's atmosphere. So this guy is doing volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, you name it. That's the kind of stuff he's making. And so he's not the only one, is my point. There are others out there. They're not part of blue. They're not green. They're not in the warfighter's hands, and they absolutely should be. So Tracy, let's go to you. Anduril, building out the Pentagon's dream of deadly drone swarms. So what a great way to close this show. Tell us about this one.
Well, this article really spoke to me kind of between the lines, so to speak, because as a naval officer, I'm always thinking about the projection of power from international waters all over the globe to meet U.S. strategic objectives and to align with our international allies and partners and other global strategic objectives as well. So the part that really jumped out at me, because it seems like most folks are really familiar with this Anduril piece, is thinking about this type of technology more than targeting, more than surveillance and location, more than eye in the sky, and having it associated with a crewed air platform as a wingman. Like that kind of hit me in the head, because I had this vision, because as General Paz was saying, we should have had, if I were in charge, we'd have aircraft carriers that could like divide into little bits and go out and do things and then come back together. I've seen plans for things like that from years ago that look amazing, that never go anywhere. But that's kind of what this is. It's almost science fiction-y in a way, in the sense that you could have a package like this on board the aircraft carrier that could be run, as we've been talking about, through that down delegation of authority and permission to the pilot on the scene, with all of these wing people, wingmen that are this technology that's at their advantage and beck and call for mission accomplishment. And the string that I saw running through all of these is, from General Paz's article, there's things that we've learned that we're not doing. Why is that? From Trent's article, what are we going to do with this historical problems that we keep engaging in over and over again, like with the machine gun piece? And this is a bit of a of a diversion, but one thing that article brought to my mind was the Chinese high altitude balloon. Everybody acted like when that shoot down happened on the East Coast, well, what are these things? We've never seen these before. This has never happened. We were using high altitude balloons for surveillance in the Civil War. Don't act like this is something we've never heard of before. I'm sorry, I get really excited about this because to me, from a positive perspective, because there's so much negativity in all of this. We're constrained by culture. We don't have the money. Our Congress can't get their act together to have a budget. Yet here we are with these technological innovations that can give the actual warfighter, whether they're the person driving the aircraft, pulling the trigger, what they need to accomplish the mission, so that we don't have that 25-mile screwdriver or 3,000-mile screwdriver from Washington, D.C. turning the screw. We can have somebody who's in the field, in the air, doing the mission. Because this technology, from a naval perspective anyway, could be highly applicable, undersea, surface, and aloft. And our power projection platforms could do all of those things. And it's exciting that a company that doesn't have that kind of august gravitas of a 70-plus year technology firm or military supply firm is out there doing these things. So I'm not as articulate as our other friends because I get too excited, but kind of over to you all for your thoughts on it, because I think I might have been seeing it from a slightly different perspective.
Well, it makes sense that you would, given your background, but also to have, little uncrewed surface vehicles patrolling around a large ship that's underway to protect it against things like what the Ukraine is deploying against the Black Sea Fleet. Makes sense. Very similar to what the Air Force has done with this collaborative combat Air Force. General Posse, you've been covering this. You've been writing about it, talking about it, following the CCA program for a while now. You read this article. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I hate to keep beating a dead horse, but I'm going to beat the culture horse again. And to be honest with you, man-to-man teaming, which is, I guess, the new word for it, is an excellent way to Trojan horse autonomy into people that are afraid of it. Because in the Air Force's thing, fighter pilots are king, and you can't threaten the F-22 program or the F-35 program, but you can augment the F-22 and the F-35 program with these autonomous collaborative platforms or loyal wingmen, and these things can come in and they can fly in formation, and you can tell them to do all this stuff. It's going to allow the Air Force, in particular, and I'm picking on the Air Force now, to figure out what it takes to fly autonomous aircraft, real autonomous aircraft that can do things on their own. But in a very short period of time, I'm going to say a couple of years, people are going to start thinking, okay, well, if these autonomous aircraft can do all this, why do I have to send an F-35 in there with them if they can do it on their own? And again, doesn't the F-35 pilot have a full-time day job pressing all of his or her buttons? And how is he going to have time to control all of these things? So I'm all for it. And I do think that there are very legitimate uses for man-on-man teaming. The Air Force has got one with the autonomous collaborative platform. It looks like the Army is going to completely change their rotary winged procurement plan to embrace man-on-man teaming. I think there's already some great stuff going on, in the U.S. Navy between the surface warfare community and autonomous vehicles and the subsurface warfare community out there. But you've always got to ask yourself the question, man-on-man teaming, I get it, it's great, but tell me again why I have to put humans in harm's way when it looks like those drones can do those things by themselves. So I think it's a win-win.
It's culture and it's comfort. Had a little note in the chat from our producer, Mike, again, behind the scenes. It's like elevator operators. When the elevator was invented, people wouldn't get in it unless they had a dude with a hat that would press the button for them and stay with them on the ride. And, is that where we are with our fighter pilot community right now with uncrewed systems? I mean, it's kind of interesting. Trent, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So one thing that I think is interesting is coming from the TAC Air community, the best fighter pilots in the air-to-air arena were walking algorithms. Information came in and they executed the exact right thing in the exact right way at the exact right time. That's just what an algorithm does. Close air support, I would say, is still a thinking man's game. There's a lot of complexity there. But building on what Jim said, there's no doubt that an algorithm can execute the tactics required better than a human being. Like, there's just some things people can't do as well as a computer. One thing I would say, though, is we talked a lot about bad news. Like, we've identified culture, bureaucracy, like problems we're not doing what we should. But I did want to say a few things about what at DIU we are trying to do, because we can, to actually affect and bring about change. Number one, we are very closely tied to end users. I get tactical level feedback on what works, what doesn't, what people want, software, modularity, component sensors, and we are directly feeding that into what will be the first of now an annual competitive refresh of all Blue UAS systems. That's going to take place in early November, where we will have platforms ranging from FPVs, Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, components, software. Everybody's going to come and compete. The best is going to win and be eligible for inclusion on the Blue List. Not a guaranteed spot, but we want to try and drive a marketplace where the free market, as determined by our end user, says this works, this doesn't. The other big thing that we're doing is implementing some continuous monitoring for software. I said earlier, software is what we believe is going to define success in this space. To do that, we have to move faster than the DoD's current average of more than 12 months to approve a software update across the board. Pick just about any system out there today. It takes 12 months from programmer saying I'm done to DoD service or program office saying I now approve this update for distribution. At DIU today, it takes us about 90 days. That may sound better, but it's still unacceptable. What we are doing now is piloting a commercial best practice to continuously monitor that code repository in a safe and secure way, respecting the proprietary nature of it, to as soon as the developer says I'm done, 2 minutes later, we finish our scans, and then through some back-end paperwork processes we've done to prepare the way, we then approve it for release immediately. We're not there yet, but we are approaching that destination. There's going to be hiccups along the way, but that's where we see kind of the future going. And so I wanted to say, it's not all bad news. We recognize the problem. We're grappling with it. We're going to fail a lot. We're going to get stuff wrong, but we're not going to be content to just do the same thing over and over again and fail in the same way.
No, absolutely. Huge props to DIU, Trent. I mean, you guys have been breaking glass for a while. I remember when I was in the Pentagon, we had AFWorks. I think SOFWorks was mentioned earlier. Honestly, the establishment ripped their hair out when these folks came around, because like, oh my God, they're crazy. What are they doing? They're like breaking all the rules, but you weren't. You were breaking the glass, which needed to happen. So thank you for doing it. Thank you, John. You had your hand raised.
Yep, and I'll help you close here. I know we're getting close to the end, but listening to everything, I think it comes down to trust, right? So even if you're going to hire someone to mow your lawn, you're going to make sure this person has done it before, whether they're using a push mower or whether they have a remote controlled lawnmower, right? You want to know you can trust them. And I look back to really dumb it down when I was in graduate school for journalism, right? All the professors, they took out all the spell checks out of our computers because they thought it made us lazy to rely on spell check. They didn't trust the technology. Well, guess what? As soon as we got our first job, we used spell check because, hey, what? I got my story filed faster, right? Because I didn't have to worry about it. Something was checking it. And it comes, and I think that leads us to the next thing is, and I think Trent just touched on this, metrics to help the decision makers combat the naysayers, right? When it comes to this technology. And I see that with the whole MOSA thing I talked about, a couple of initiatives for open architecture that have come up. One is called SOSA, Sensor Open Systems Architecture. Another one is FACE, Feature Airborne Capability Environment. We cover them extensively, but it's all about reuse of components, avionics, like for example, avionics software APIs, application across multiple sections. And I remember many years ago, a 3-star got up and said, I think what you guys are doing is really interesting, but my wife and I just finished watching Battlestar Galactica, and isn't that how the Cylons got in through the software? So, so there's a lot of cultural bias, and you got to prove to them. You got to show.
I just have to take a knee for the Battlestar Galactica reference. Excellent.
Absolutely.
And the Cylons, who knew?
Yeah, well, yeah. And so I think that comes down to that. And I remember I was in I was hosting a virtual summit last year with a guy named Dave Tremper from the OD, in charge of electronic warfare. And he goes, you need to get the metrics. Just he was talking about MOSA, but I think no matter what you do, and I think Trent talked about some of the data he's starting to create, that is how you combat it. And you help them gain that trust. And another way to do it is by man-on-man teaming. Hey, they're going to see this stuff works pretty well. Maybe I don't need to send somebody into combat. You got to show them. Right.
Yeah.
And that's, I end on that note. So.
No, I love that. It's like you can tell me, but once you show me, I think it's a whole different game. And I'm just taking this different, right? In counter UAS world, people are having all these conversations. Nothing's moving forward from an authority standpoint. It's like, have you taken the civil libertarians into the field with the actual technology and physically showed them this is the stuff we collect? It has nothing to do with privacy. I mean, show them. Like, this is a no-brainer to me. So great point. Great way to end the show, man. We are at the top of the hour. I knew this was going to fly. I knew this was going to be fast and furious. And boy, was it ever. It was such a fun show. I wanted to thank all of you. Tracy, Commander Reynolds, General Poss, John, Trent, you guys are awesome. This has been super fun. I hope everybody out there had as much fun as we did talking about this stuff. So thank you again. And last, once more, Valmont, Aiken, True Weather Solutions, Mark 43, our sponsors. We appreciate you guys so we can have these fun conversations. So that's all she wrote, everybody. Next month, by the way, we are talking counter UAS. So join us. It's going to be about mid or towards the end of July. We'll see you on our next full crew. We are out here.